All right. What's up, Aaron? Appreciate you coming on the Exit Liquidity podcast. This is episode 3 of the whole NFT Fi summer we're gonna do. So I'm pretty excited to hear more about what you guys are doing at Wasabi. So for people listening, in the recording and everything, Aaron is the chief executive at Wasabi, CEO, and Wasabi is an NFT options protocol. So, Aaron, if you could give just like a quick intro on some of your previous work, how you came across starting Wasabi, and maybe a few stories of how you were exit liquidity.
Yeah, for sure. So thank you for doing this, guys. I think this is sick. NFT summer, and really appreciate you guys like taking the time to talk to all the builders in the space. A little background about me, like I'm a builder. I've worked at startups only. I've helped scale them from like less than 10 employees to 200 employees, from zero revenue to 20 million ARR. And that's like what I take joy in, just building things out of nothing. I'm a computer engineer by training, then turned into a product manager, which gave me like a good enough understanding of different aspects about like how a business should function. And I happen to come from a family of artists. I bought my first Bitcoin in 2016. That was like I sold very early, was probably not exit liquidity, but like good liquidity for other people then. But then I was like fully red pilled into crypto when I bought my first NFT in 2021. Because I come from a family of artists, I was like very amazed by the idea of being able to like fundraise through these smaller pieces of art. And I just thought like this could open up a lot of interesting possibilities for the future, and decided to build more efficient economies around this new financial asset. I met my co-founder when I first moved to New York. We built a couple startups together, Ice Cream Guy, and then we built an NFT aggregator because like we were very interested in the space and thought it was very early. And then we quickly identified a couple problems that we thought no one was really solving and that we thought were pretty big. Firstly, like you can't earn any yield on your NFTs. We have all of these lending protocols, but with lending, the NFT owner most of the time is net negative, right? As the NFT owner, you just borrow against your NFT and then you have to pay back the loan with interest. Whereas with Wasabi, you can actually earn that interest upfront on your NFT. It is actually like from the buy side, similar to Blend. I can dive into that, but for the sake of time, I'll just go into our other two benefits, which is the ability to hedge, right? We're getting into very volatile times. There's no way for anyone to really like fully hedge NFTs or short them in order to take profits. And that's like another solution that Wasabi provides. And then lastly, whenever someone talks about NFTs, most people think about Bored Apes or Punks or Azukis. And again, up until Blend and their buy now, pay later, there wasn't any opportunity for anyone to get real exposure to the underlying assets for the fraction of a price without really fractionalizing them. And we've seen that like fractionalization with NFTs does not really have really good product market fit so far.
Awesome. Yeah. I think a lot of the solutions you guys are bringing definitely fill a pretty big void. And I think in this space right now, most of the projects that are building something now have a pretty large scale vision for what this niche looks like in the coming months, in the coming year. Could you talk a little bit about what you think this space looks like and how Wasabi fits into that like larger market in the long run?
Yeah, like when you look at traditional markets, right, the volume of derivatives is like 16 times that of spot because it gives you exposure in both directions, and derivatives also like enable you to get affordable exposure. With liquid tokens, you can buy them in fractions, but with NFTs, you can't really do that. So like I think derivatives will even play a much bigger play in the space. And also with lending, like our put options are not just a hedge against NFTs, they're a hedge against NFT-backed loans. Our call options, like you can consider them as very similar to like a buy now, pay later product, because you're basically reserving the right to purchase the underlying for an upfront small premium, and then you're paying another amount later on. So like all of these, I think fit really well with the existing space. Because we're physically settled, we built an arbitrage flow that if your option's in the money, you basically don't have to put in any upfront capital to exercise your option. We give you a loan, you purchase the underlying by exercising the option, and then sell to the highest bidder in the marketplace, in our partner marketplaces, and you can just take your profit. So like all of the things that we've built basically incentivize people to lend higher amounts to collect more interest. They incentivize more trades to happen in existing marketplaces. So we're actually making the whole space much, much more efficient. So like given short term where the space is going, I think we have a very important role to play at the center of NFT finance. But separately, in the long run, I think NFTs are just like a blank canvas, right? We've been using them to mainly represent profile pictures, but you can represent anything. You can represent your liquidity that is locked in Uniswap. And if you want to avoid price fluctuations on your curve on Uniswap in the future, I am really bullish that you are going to be able to deposit those LP NFTs onto Wasabi and issue options or purchase options on them. I am very bullish about in-game assets, MMORPG games, and their in-game economies. And I think like any real-world economy, you need price insurance, you need price stability. So again, I think there are huge implications there. And then like art, real world assets, like we're slowly getting there. I was at ETH Denver, and for a like long time, I think real world assets have been a recurring theme, and I think it's going to be the holy grail for the NFT space as well.
Awesome. Yeah, we had Geo from Abacus on a couple days ago, and he was talking about how obviously by now we've come to refer to NFTs generally as PFPs, these JPEGs we flip around, but he thinks that it's more beneficial in the long run for the definition, or at least like the naming convention, to kind of start to flip to be just a container for anything. And then the PFPs, the JPEGs, always sort of start seeing them more, maybe not we, but like the broader, like more normie community starts seeing them more as collectibles more than anything else. And, you know, if you want to dig beneath the surface, you can, but past that, obviously there's a whole lot more to get into with you know, gaming, hopefully one day real world assets, all this other stuff. So like that's definitely in mind there. One thing that we've kind of been like easing into with each NFT5 project we've been talking to as well is specifically like liquidity in the space and kind of where it's at now for each like given vertical and what kind of needs to happen to start moving it in a direction where the primitives start to become more useful for anyone looking to hedge, anyone looking to perform whatever interactions on their assets. Can you talk a little bit about the challenge of getting liquidity for providing options?
Yeah. So I'm very lucky because we have an amazing team. Like our team is mostly consisting of devs and like BD. I like to call our BD team more like the liquidity team, and then the dev team is like the product team. We're like I said, we're very lucky. So we've been able to bootstrap close to a million in liquidity right off the bat, just as we were launching. But It hasn't been very easy. Like, although we have all of these unique value propositions, right? Like, there is no other protocol right now that you're able to generate as much yield, which is real ETH in yield. It's not some tokens that we've arbitrarily created or anything. But it is still very tough to kind of convince people that we're not scammers and they're going to actually make this much money without having your protocol deployed on mainnet. So our go-to-market plan included a lot of like step-by-step approaches to slowly prove out all the risky parts, like prove out that none of the risky parts actually posed any major risk to our LPs and to our traders. So we started with 2 testnet trading competitions where we actually got an understanding of how much LPs could potentially make. And then we got our 2 audits. One of them was Zelic, so that like LPs didn't have any concerns about smart contract issues that we might have. Zelic, as you guys might have known, they've done the audits for Yuga Labs as well. And then there's a portfolio company, like one of our investors. They have this groundbreaking portfolio company called Narya AI. They use fuzzing to basically, they have an AI agent that basically tries to manipulate your code over and over again. And even if it fails, they give your code to 2 black hat hackers to let them like try and hack your code and see if they can break it. So we went through 2 of those audits. Now we're getting a 3rd one just to make sure from Fubar. And then we have obviously a rewards program. And with that rewards program, we had certain incentives that geared people towards depositing earlier. All of them, when we like played them together, worked really, really well, in my opinion.
Awesome. Yeah, I mean, it's like almost every day we're reminded how important security is before and in the process of going to market. I was literally drugged like just last week from, I don't know if you guys heard of Merlin, but they had a CERTIC audit and yet it meant nothing. The team was still able to make away with some like 2 million, I think. So glad to hear you guys have a significant focus on that. I also am curious to hear your take on, for options specifically, the challenge of having a secondary market for your contracts, because I'm not too familiar with how the problem works in with NFT options specifically, but I know for fungible token options, at least with a lot of the platforms I've used, it's difficult to exit a position before expiry without taking like a pretty significant haircut. More often than not, if you're going to open a position, at least on most platforms, you have to be willing to hold it until expiry. I'm wondering if you see that being a problem for Wasabi or for NFT options in general as well.
Yeah, so like my answer to this question will consist of 2 parts, right? Firstly, we're minting each option as an NFT, like going back to our initial discussion of NFTs just being a container. I think we have a like pretty good use case of them using them as these to represent these option contracts on chain. And whenever an option contract is minted on Wasabi, you could basically list them on OpenSea, you can list them on Blur, you could even list them without paying any gas on Wasabi. And it integrates seamlessly to the front end UI. So like a trader would not necessarily know if they like looked very carefully, they would understand obviously, but they wouldn't necessarily know right off the bat that it's a secondary sale or if it's like a primary sale from a pool that's happening on the option side of things. That's the first thing we did. And like I think over time that really helps with limited liquidity, right? Because even if the liquidity in Wasabi is limited, people could still relist their options that they now have as NFTs for a higher premium and exit out of that position very quickly. We've seen a lot of examples of those happening on our testnet trading competition. But separately, that's why we built the arbitrage flow. So the arbitrage flow or like cashless option exercise takes like one of the most beautiful things about crypto, I think, is flash loans, right? And one of the other very beautiful things about options is that if you're in the money, you basically have an asymmetric trade opportunity. But one of the biggest hurdles of that asymmetric trade opportunity is the initial capital you need to put in order to pay the strike price, exercise the option, and then sell to the market at a higher price. And if you have a Bored Ape call option, let's say, Bored Ape floor prices are around 50 ETH. So like your strike, assuming your strike's going to be around there, it is very hard for you to basically exercise that option even if you're in the money. That's why we built this flow. So within a single transaction, once you on Wasabi, you just click a button which says exercise with arbitrage trade. We get you a loan. You purchase the underlying without paying anything from your pocket. You go to the market. We match you with the bids. Like we basically have all marketplaces. And you just sell to the highest bidder. And then you collect your payout. You pay back the loan, all within a single transaction. And you just take your profit and walk away. And what actually ended up happening is you exercise your option without paying a dime from your own pocket, and you've generated a spot trade on the actual marketplace. So like we're actually bringing more liquidity to the underlying market just by providing these options.
That's actually really cool. That arbitrage feature is awesome. Where are you getting the, I guess, quote unquote, flash loan from?
So
How does that mechanism work on the back end?
So Aave has a flash loan product. You could use that if it's like within a certain amount of range in order to make our traders pay less gas. We give them a loan from like our own contracts. So like it is fairly simple, right? Because the flash loan will only execute if the overall transaction executes. So if it doesn't, like you don't lose anything.
Awesome. That's actually really cool. In terms of like pricing, I feel like one of the biggest issues with the NFT space is people are kind of wary and just nervous about holding different NFTs because nobody knows what like the actual fair price for these PFPs is. Do you guys hang like a pricing mechanism?
Yeah, so are like what are you are you asking how we're pricing the options or
Yeah.
yeah. So as you know, like there's been other option protocol attempts in the space, but we think one of the biggest problems is on the sell side. Like option protocols are in a way two-sided markets, and it's kind of like a chicken and egg. If you don't have any traders, you're not going to get LPs. If you don't have any LPs, you're definitely not going to get any traders. But I think the problem starts with LPs. So like you need to get LPs first. And these people, when you like consider NFT owners, most of them are not super familiar with options. But given that fractionalization is not very attractive to NFT holders, I think options is the best possible way for anyone who owns an NFT to actually earn real yield on that NFT. So how do you make the pricing of an option for the NFT holder fairly straightforward and very, very risk averse, right? Because if you price options statically, which is the case in most of the previous attempts, like you would actually upload you would put the underlying asset on chain with a specific strike price and a specific premium attached to it, given the current floor price. But tomorrow, there might be a huge jump on the floor price, and the option that you've defined statically could already be in the money, and you could be making less than what you would make by just selling on that day. In order to avoid all of these problems, we have a Oracle solution. So on Wasabi, you deposit assets and you define certain risk parameters. According to those, we deploy a smart contract for you on chain, and all of your assets are basically held within that smart contract that only gives you the access to either withdraw assets or deposit more assets. So like it's fully under your own custody. And given your risk parameters, right? Like think of it like putting in a limit order. So if I want to issue call options on a collection, it means that I already have an asset from that collection. So I already have an NFT. And issuing calls is basically like putting in a sell order. So if I bought my Bored Ape at 5 ETH, I could, like, in my risk parameters, I'm going to say I want my assets to be locked for at least a day, at most a month, and then I want them to be sold for at least 10 ETH strike. And then for put options, it's basically like putting in a buy order, because with puts, you're putting in ETH to issue puts. And you're basically saying, again, like, this is how much I want my assets to be collateralized for at most. And this is how much I want to buy for at like the maximum level, given your risk tolerance. And then at any given day, whenever a trader logs on to the front end, we would take the most recent floor price. We would render potential options that the pool could write on those given parameters. And the trader now, instead of just seeing a static single premium and a strike price, they have options, no pun intended, to choose from. And that basically streamlines the whole process of order matching. And those are like basically two of our biggest like innovations, I would say, in the space. One of them is our option liquidity pools, where the LPs can very easily define risk parameters and issue options. The second one is the virtual order book, which we create dynamically based on the most recent bids and asks in the space. And then lastly, my favorite is the arbitrage tool, which I described earlier.
Interesting. So the pricing themselves comes from like the protocol activity in the pools. Do I understand that correctly?
So it's two things, right? We look at both historical volatility and the activity in pools, so the available supply and the available demand in protocol, to get a hybrid approach that both uses historical volatility as well as implied volatility on protocol.
And when you say historical volatility, are you talking like the price history of the NFT from like maybe like Upshot or Chainlink oracles, or just what previously has happened in the pools and on the protocol?
So we've built our own data pipeline to basically parse all ERC 721 transactions that have happened since the first ERC 721 contract. And using that data, we're able to get all historical transactions on all Ethereum collection.
Wow, that's actually very interesting. I think Ali, you got another question?
Yeah, it's a bit broader, I guess, but I'm curious as to, because I have an idea in my mind, but I'm wondering what you see the trade-offs for, because obviously there's a lot of cool shit you can do with NFT options, but how do you see them as different from lending and perps? Like what could lending necessarily do better than options versus what could they do worse, and then the same for perps?
Yeah, very good question. So, like I said, all of these products have two-sided markets. So I think we should like talk about how they differ from each different user's perspective, right? So I'm gonna compare a lender to an LP on Wasabi, to like an option issuer. And then I'm going to compare those two to like AMM or an insurance pool on like a perpetual protocol that is based on a virtual AMM. So on the lending side of things, as an LP, I'm depositing ETH and like I accept certain terms, and then I provide instant liquidity to the borrower with their NFT as collateral. My upside is I collect interest, and most probably I'm going to receive my money back with interest in a short amount of time, in like a month or so. But worst case, the floor price of the NFT drops below the principal I provide upfront. And if that's the case, then the borrower has zero incentive to pay back the loan with the interest. So I end up being net negative. I end up losing money because now they defaulted. I have an NFT which has a floor price that is below the upfront principal that I put in. So I have to sell that NFT. I don't know if it like crashed fully, if it was a Moonbird, for example. God help me, right? Because those prices haven't been going really well. But with LPs on Wasabi, you could basically define your risk parameters so that best case scenario, right? You deposit your ETH in order to issue put options. You define a buy order, like you're not going to deposit ETH onto Wasabi unless you're bullish about a collection. Let's say I'm bullish about CryptoPunks. Given the Bland announcement, I think there's going to be extreme volatility on punks, and I want to both harness the volatility of the market and make some money off of it. And I also want to, like, worst case scenario, yeah, like I want a punk. I want to collect some punks. So I create a punk pool on Wasabi. Best case scenario, I issue these options. I give people the opportunity. I sell insurance to punk holders or people who think the punk price is going to go down. I collect those premiums upfront. I generate real yield. Worst case scenario, I put in a buy order. Like, this is basically a buy order, right? And I buy a punk at lower than today price within the range that I want to buy a punk at. So at the end of the day, I'm still net positive. And we've actually seen an example of this very recently on one of our pools. We had a Pudgy Penguin pool. Someone bought a put option. The LP was wanting to accumulate Pudgies, and the trader actually ended up exercising their option. They made a little bit of money by purchasing on Blur and then selling onto this at the strike to the Wasabi pool. But right after they sold, Pudgy Penguins got swept, and basically the LP made more money than the trader did. And then comparing that to LP on a perpetual protocol, right? Especially on a virtual AMM based one, the AMM based one, the LPs there, like if the market's taking one side of the trade and no one's taking the other side, especially with like collections that are super bullish right now, such as Milady's, the LPs need to take the other side of the trade. So what ends up happening is you're basically taking all the unfavorable trades that the market does not want to take. And I don't think that's like a very scalable solution, given that a whale can come in, right? They could take a very like leverage bet on one side of the trade, and then they could try and manipulate the market, and then the protocol itself and the insurance pool could end up being in bad debt, and they could even go insolvent. That's the sell side of things. I know it's been like a mouthful, but if you guys don't have any questions, I'm happy to compare the buy side as well.
I do have one question on the last bit there of LPs kind of being exposed to, I guess, like a more unfavorable side of trades, given that they're essentially, to have liquidity, they need to be counterparties for whatever trades are going on in a virtual MM. In my mind, I mean, GMX works just fine.
But GMX is
Well,
order book
quite well.
based. GMX is not a VAMM. GMX
Okay.
has the
So-
actual spot underlying. That's like where the GLP token comes into play.
Right. Interesting. Okay.
Yeah. For like in DeFi, my position is like me and Ollie have talked about this quite a bit about what is like the quote unquote winning model between options and perps in the NFT fi space. And to me, especially with a lot of what you were just explaining, the options mechanism to me makes more sense for these like non-fungible assets. But I think the biggest hurdle is when you look at DeFi, options in DeFi themselves have still struggled to kind of gain significant market share. People are going to perps more often, and most of the things that you're seeing in the option space would be like something like Jones DAO, where they kind of just put it all in a vault and like automate those things because users find it difficult to kind of grasp and understand.
Yeah.
What does that hurdle look like for you guys, and how are you guys combating that barrier to entry that a lot of users feel options bring?
Yeah, so couple answers. Like I want to first start by explaining why I think options make more sense fundamentally for NFTs, and then I'm gonna go into like why I think in DeFi perpetuals have been better and like found better product market fit, and why like what we're doing to basically find product market fit for NFT options. To your point, NFTs are unique, right? Each asset is unique and they're illiquid. Like to give an example, right? Most traded perpetuals on liquid tokens are Bitcoin, ETH, and XRP, if I'm not mistaken. And their daily spot transaction volume is at the scale of billions. I think their average is at like 4 billion daily. And because these are fungible tokens, they're sold in any arbitrary amount through like different protocols. So I don't even know how many transactions they have on a daily basis. So they're very, very liquid, like water. So it's very easy to create a continuous function where you can let people take bets on either side, betting on like either if it's going to go up or going to go down. And you're very like protected against manipulations, and you have a very healthy continuous price feed. On the other hand, with NFTs are extremely illiquid and they're discrete. So as a comparison, like we said, liquid token spot trade is 4 billion. The most daily volume, when I looked at these metrics, was on Wrapped CryptoPunks, which was only at 4 million, which is like orders of magnitudes lower. And that 4 million daily transaction volume constituted of 100 transactions. So when you think about that, right, you have 100 discrete transactions happening on a daily basis. And each of these assets that are being transacted are unique. They have a different price point. How are you going to put that discrete function onto like a continuous signal? You have to really force it. And it's not going to be like a very healthy one, in my opinion. And you're eventually going to have some problems. Whereas options are much more like analog, right? Especially the ones that are on Wasabi, you just deposit assets. They're used as collateral. You basically issue a single option based on a single specific collateral. Right now, for the sake of simplicity, we just base them off of floor price, but we recently either announced or we're announcing today manual option pricing, which you're going to be able to use to price grails or much more expensive assets as well. So as a tool, it fits much better for the non-fungible and illiquid nature of NFTs. And it actually has the potential of making the whole market, the existing spot underlying market as well, more liquid, because you're letting smaller fish enter the market with more affordable exposure by the purchase of these premiums. So that was the first part of my answer. And then to the second part, like given these things, right? If NFTs were much more liquid, I think perpetuals are much easier to understand from a buyer's perspective. So as a buyer, you don't have to care about premiums, you don't have to care about strike prices, you don't need to care about expiration date. So you just long or short, you get some leverage, and then you're good to go. And you don't even need to exercise, right? Because you have a funding rate, you can get auto liquidated. It's like it's much less demanding than options. So that's why like it makes sense for them to find better product market fit on DeFi. But I think like that's not the case with NFTs. That's not going to be the case with NFTs. We're going to see a lot of liquidations. We're going to see a lot of manipulations on the floor price, especially for like a perpetual product, and I don't think people are going to enjoy that. And separately, like we talked about the downstream positive effects of options, right? Like your put options can be insurance for your NFTs or NFT-backed loans. You don't get that with perpetuals because you get auto-liquidated if the price moves at a certain direction before your loan term ends. So all of those are the reasons why I think from a first principles approach, options make more sense. But given that, how do you convince the market to use a more complicated product? Well, I think our answer is kind of hidden somewhere in between the buy now, pay later product that Blend has recently announced, right? Because that is basically an option when you think about it. You pay an upfront premium, which is much lower than the floor price, in order to have the right to fulfill an agreement to purchase the underlying in a later date in the future. But the terms that Blend have are very predatory for the trader. And I think options that you have on Wasabi are a much better financial tool in order to get affordable long exposure as like a buy now, pay later similar product. And then the only meaningful product to actually hedge yourself against market downturns.
Awesome. Yeah, I think that was a perfect explanation. Could you go a bit more to clarify the announcement aspect? I was a little confused on what you're actually announcing there.
Well, we have a new feature where you can price options. Like if you have, let's say, a very grail NFT or Bored Ape that's like at a much higher floor, that's at a much higher price than the floor. Now you're going to be able to define like parameters specifically for that underlying in order to issue options on it. On Wasabi.
Interesting. So you're pulling on the different rarities that come within the entire collection.
Yeah, but like we're not basically saying, oh, like this is a grail, as like we're very permissionless. So as the owner of the NFT, if you think it's a grail asset, instead of just listing it on floor and issuing options on floor, now you're going to be able to issue options on whatever you think its value is.
Interesting. And you touched a little bit about how perps allow for the most degenerate of degenerates to kind of max lever, and that's kind of why they're being utilized and finding product market fit. Is there a world where Wasabi starts dabbling into leverage?
When you think about options, right? Options are naturally leveraged. So when you buy a call, you basically are getting exposure, like you're getting 10x leverage already built into it.
Okay, I see.
Like as you get more out of the money, your leverage increases. As you get more in the money with the option you're purchasing, your leverage decreases.
Interesting.
Yeah,
I like that.
definitely. Yeah, options are leveraged options, especially like over leveraged options, are scary for that reason. In my experience, well, I guess like TradFi experience, I would imagine leveraged options against NFTs would be a monster to say the least. Aaron, I think I've asked you this in one-on-one before, but it's been a while, and I'm curious to get your thoughts out into the public as well. One of my biggest like interests within NFT options is the potential to sell naked calls, naked puts one day. I am a big fan of selling volatility for, at the moment, fungible tokens. It's been a pretty decent strategy for me. I'm wondering what you see as like barriers to having that for NFTs, and what like the path to getting there is, how far off we might be.
So that is definitely top on the priority list for us as well. But like in traditional markets, right, you need to KYC in order to do that sort of like naked calls and puts. With DeFi, like KYC is basically against the overall ethos. So like that is a major problem. But over time, we think we could build relationships with our trusted LPs and Like we have the rewards program that I talked about, the points program. Those points are basically like showing you how like good an LP is in what they do. So like LPs maybe who reach a certain number of points, or LPs who we know, like who we're very close with, we want to let them slowly be able to issue naked options. But separately, like a more scalable solution would be through like doing KYC, but I don't know if like that's a question for you, right? Would you be willing to KYC yourself on Wasabi in order to issue naked calls and puts?
Well, it's a good question. Probably not. I think most would be more staunchly opposed to it than I would. But yeah, it's I mean, for me, for as a humble Ponzi connoisseur, it's difficult to even imagine like what a different route to getting there would be. KYC or having some sort of actual like credit system to have under collateralized lending in that fashion. I don't know that there's another option yet. So, but I'm glad to hear that that's top of mind for you guys because to me, as a user, that's a really important feature. That will be a really important feature. I would love to hear a little bit of alpha at this point. I looked a little bit into season one for your rewards. I'm wondering if you guys like have in mind kind of like as a user, what's like the optimal way to interact with Wasabi to get the most rewards? Have you thought about that at all?
Yeah, so basically, whenever you trade, right, you get 100x your trading points. Whenever you put in bids, whenever you like accept bids. As an LP, we had like very early booster awards. Next week, we might have some additional incentives. So we're getting ready for like another product update, a new feature announcement next week that I think is going to be very exciting for the traders specifically. And with that announcement, we're looking to make another interesting announcement on the point reward system. So I would definitely tune in for that.
Awesome. Just had a side thought. Going back to the selling naked calls, naked puts. I don't know how familiar you guys are with Gearbox. I know they operate solely off of their own contract accounts, but if you're familiar with them, do you see something like that as a route to providing leverage for selling naked calls or puts?
I'm not super familiar with them. What do they do?
So they're essentially like a leverage primitive for DeFi. It's super early stage right now. It's limited to whitelisted users only who provide something like 100K in liquidity. But essentially, the way it works is you have LPs who are depositing across some stables and ETH, I believe, and then the whitelisted users can go in and take out loans in the form of contract accounts up to 10x leverage. So let's say I have 10 ETH that I go in and let's say I'm a whitelisted user. I have 10 ETH. I go and deposit into Gearbox. I am then able to take out a loan in the form of a contract account of the form of its own wallet that can operate across some protocols in DeFi with that contains 100 ETH or that contains 50 ETH, depending on what my risk parameters are. Given that it's all in like an operated wallet, they're able to liquidate whenever. But yeah, I don't know. I guess off of that like brief summary,
Yeah, that is
I don't know if you're able to tell if
that
that's
is
an approach.
that is pretty interesting. So like they basically get a they get some deposit and then they give you like they basically lend you some money that you can only use in specific protocols, and they basically control liquidation given the event that you're losing a lot of money. I think that makes a
Yes.
lot of sense, and I think that actually could be a solution for Wasabi where we let you issue options, but whenever you pass a certain like risk level where your options are maybe like too much in the money or like you're losing a lot of money, then we could basically ask you to stop. And I don't know if we necessarily need Gearbox. We could actually maybe do that through our smart contract, like pools that we let you deploy. So yeah, thanks for sharing that.
Absolutely, man. I take payment only in squiggles whenever you're forming that partnership.
Yeah, I'd love to get payment in squiggles.
Cool, man. And then, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, just closing off here, just wanted to get some of your like thoughts on you touched on it a little bit about Blur's announcement and the mechanism that they're using. How do you feel about their like the ecosystem that they're building and the way that they're deploying products?
So the ecosystem that they're building is definitely like beneficial for the whole vertical, right? Because with like NFT space is super fragmented. You have collectors on one hand that have gotten into the space and like that just like the way things are, and I don't think they like want the space to change that much. You have like marketplaces like OpenSea that have been basically like the leader on the spot side of things, but that basically failed to introduce major innovations in the space. And then you have a new entrant like Blur that is actually taking a step further than any of the predecessors. Like I was very excited about SudoSwap when they first came into play, but then I don't think they were able to like grow as much as I expected them to grow. And then we have Blur, and now like they're getting into lending, which is like a great. They got into lending, which is a great validation for the whole NFT finance vertical. And when you think about the product buy now pay later, right? It's basically interestingly structured option in my opinion, like almost like a future because it's a perpetual, but basically instead of paying the NFT owner upfront, you share the burden of purchasing an NFT with the lender. So similar to buying an option, the buyer puts in like a fraction of the floor, like let's say 10% of the floor. The remaining 90% is taken as a loan. And then the NFT like the buyer actually is quote unquote purchasing is held under like that loan as collateral, and the user has to pay back the loan with interest, which is basically a strike, in order to get exposure into these collections in a much more affordable way. And I think that is a huge validation for Wasabi as well, for what we've been building, because like we're attacking the same problem. So given that the NFT options market is slowly becoming to exist, I think any new product or any new like big player entering the space is actually very good for us.
Awesome. And I think for the Blur, a little bit more about Blur, and I see you guys are taking a little bit of inspiration from their points mechanism with like seasons. And I think the consensus is that there's a future airdrop in the works for a token. I think when I like to think about a token for protocols, I think the main aspect that they provide is kind of like a fix in a ways or a strength to a weakness that the protocol has. How do you go about thinking about how something like that would work if you're thinking about that?
Yeah, so like I think one of the like most interesting things about crypto is that you can align incentives between your users and your protocol. And to your point, you can incentivize your users to basically take certain actions to fix whatever's missing on the protocol. And I think Blur is doing an amazing job at that. I personally believe that like there's a difference between incentivization of like using products that people like versus giving out free money for people to do things. Like during COVID, right, all of these quick delivery startups, they were giving out people like $50 for their first order, and I don't think like any of them are really doing well right now, because that's like basically you're faking some kind of product market fit until you're proven that you don't have it. I'm not saying that that's going to be the case for Blur, but I think they might be like exaggerating the incentives a little bit, in my opinion. But are they doing a good job? Yeah, they're obviously doing like a great job, because within the first day of their launch, they basically destroyed all the other lending protocols. And that is just like an insane metric for anyone to achieve.
Do you think those other lending protocols are worried at this point, or do you think that there's room for everybody in such a small like niche with limited liquidity at the moment?
So, like, I think the situation would be more competitive for the other players if they could afford to not take any fees, and if they could afford to have such token incentives. But what like puts Blur in a very unique position is that they raised a lot, and that they have the ability to do, like, they probably have the ability to like go on without any fees for the foreseeable future, and basically give out these like token rewards on a like regular basis. And I don't think any other protocol in the space has that kind of capital or agency right now in order to compete on those terms. Because at the end of the day, like, no matter how good your UI is, no matter how good your gas optimization or like speed is, people just want to pay less. And anyone who can provide that is gonna win the game.
Interesting. And speaking a bit more on, I just want to hear your thoughts a bit about the mechanisms behind how they do that. You mentioned the gas optimization and the lowering in fees, and I think well with Blur and Blend, they're introducing, like, they highlighted the peer-to-peer model very much. Do you see the peer-to-peer model winning out, or do you eventually see peer-to-pool kind of taking over?
I think people are lazy, and eventually, like, what do you like? If I gave you two opportunities, right? If I told you, I have this black box, you can put your money in that black box, and I'll make you 20% interest every year, versus I have this product where you have to put in certain like parameters, and like you need to basically agree with certain borrowers on the interest rate and everything in order to make the same amount of yield. Like, which one are you going to eventually choose? Maybe like if you're technically savvy, you're going to choose the second one, where you're going to have more control because you don't trust a black box. But most people are just going to go with the easier route because they don't really understand how to price these things, and they don't want to, like, it's basically ROI, right? How much effort am I putting in and how much return am I getting?
Yeah. And so with that in mind, do you think, like, right now, Wasabi, which side of that do you think Wasabi leans more on, and where do you want it to be?
Wasabi is like the protocol we have right now is just the version one. It is like, although we have pools, it's kind of peer to peer because only one pool owner can exist, and they need to deploy various pools for different collections. But over time, we're going to be working on reducing the number of pools. Firstly, by assigning like multiple asset pools for individual LPs. And that doesn't necessarily have to be only ERC 721s, right? We already accept ETH, and we're deployed on Ethereum. So like, it's very easy for us to cover all ERC 721s, 1155s, as well as ERC 20s. If you want to like put in a liquid staking derivative instead of ETH, if you want to put in maybe like a shitcoin even, those should be all doable on Wasabi. And then over time, like, liquidity fragmentation is always bad. I don't know if we have like a set opinion on this right now as a team, but I would like, if I was an outside person looking into the protocol, I would probably think that combining everything in larger pools and giving people like more easy exposure to the underlying assets would be a better like would attract more liquidity and smaller liquidity.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. Wrapping up here, I know we're running a little bit over time, so I appreciate you sticking with us. I really enjoy the way that you think and the way that your kind of mind is working. You seem to have like a very good grasp of, you know, DeFi, like how the community thinks, how users think. I'm kind of curious about what kind of communities you've been involved in the past. Were you, in Discords for different options protocols previously, and were like, this would be awesome for NFTs? Where do you kind of lurk in the space nowadays? What do you enjoy looking at the most?
I enjoy like I don't enjoy things that are that don't have a ground, right? Like I like a little challenge. I like to think. I enjoy talking to people who understand the space as much as I do. So, and right now, like I'm fully devoted to Wasabi, and like we're a small team. We're like total 6 full time, and then the extended team is like 9. So I have to wear a lot of hats and I have to do a lot of thinking. So most of my time is actually physically spent with my team. But separately, we might or might not have a Telegram chat about NFT finance, where like most NFT finance protocol founders and investors are. There are some interesting chats happening there. I'm part of like some like NFT kind of communities, like non-fungible social club. Like I like to go to their events. I hold MFers, I hold dick butts. I like those. I tried proof a little bit before they quote unquote rug pulled, but like now I don't hold any of their assets. But yeah, like those are the main. Like we have another small like crypto meetup group in New York that I am pretty active in and that I go to the meetings of.
Interesting. Last question. Do you have like where is PFP from? Is that a custom one for Wasabi? I saw some of the other guys have that.
No, so we have a lot of different people in the team that I think really represent the whole crypto market. So me, like my background, as you can, like I'm a nerd, right? Like I like DeFi stuff. Like I like to talk about these concepts, to conceptualize like different mechanisms, think about different like protocol architecture and everything. I'm basically a thinker. And then we have my co-founder, Ice Cream Guy, who's like a builder who could like literally give him the task. He'll fucking do it in a day. He's just like that kind of person. We have MCAGs, who comes from like a traditional finance background, who has been an alpha caller for illiquid capital, which is like full of traditional traders. And he was like a Solana alpha caller there. And now like he's very into the art world within NFTs. So he found this artist, Green Cross, who's from El Salvador, and he found his collection, Fake Dos Pepes. And he was like, dude, like there are only very limited number of these available. Like we should just get some. And then I got one. I got one for my co-founder, Ice Cream Guy. And then anyone we hired, we started basically getting some for them and started gifting them that because like at the end of the day, we're here building this for creators, right? Like NFTs. Anyone who's representing anything with NFTs is a creator. They're creating something and we're building a more efficient market for them. So instead of trying to build everything on our own, I think we should support local artists, people who have actual talent. And I really like the way my PFP looks.
Yeah, it's awesome. That's really awesome. And just a few hot questions, quick takes. Are you a fan of punks or apes? And are you an ETH maxi or like a Solana maxi? What boats do you kind of sit in?
Very easy first question. Punks for life, for sure. I don't know, like, I think they are just the grail, and I vibe more with the punk aesthetic rather than apes. Like, if this was a metaverse, I'd rather be a punk rather a monkey. But that's just my take. If I could buy one, I would in a heartbeat. So, like, very happy about the Bland announcement. Hopefully, the prices will go down a bit, and maybe like I could snag one for myself. But like purely from a natural perspective, I think you guys been the best executors in the space. Mine is more like an emotional choice. I don't know if you have any comments on this.
Yeah, I mean, I think Ali and I are in
agreement.
that same boat.
Yeah.
Do you guys have plans?
Yeah, I really,
No, man. Nah, I wish.
maybe we can buy now, pay later on
Yeah.
Blur
Yeah,
soon.
buy one for 0.04 ETH and then pay it off at 10% daily, something like that.
Yeah, hopefully Wasabi. Ali's a Nouns fan, right? Ali?
Big Nouns fan. Yeah. I have a Lil Noun, which is like people mistake it for a regular noun all the time, which is kind of cool, I guess. But also I'm not in the wealth bracket to be going out and buying nouns at all either. But yeah, I like them. They're a fun community. I lurk around in the because Lil Nouns have some like delegation in Nouns now as well. So sometimes I'll like peek around on some of the proposals they have going on. I think they do good work. Really interesting experiment, if nothing else.
Yeah, I like what they're bringing to the space. Definitely.
And so, are you? I mean, there is an NFT community on Solana. My PFP is actually a Solana NFT. I just like it a lot and really participate in the community often. But there's a community on there.
Yeah,
Do you think there's? Are you a fan of the Solana ecosystem?
I am a fan. Like, I'm a fan of the community there because I think they're more open-minded. And like Solana itself, I think is better suited for like faster transactions as long as there's not a lot of volume happening at the same time. And the community is like very open-minded to the financialization of NFTs compared to Ethereum. But at the end of the day, I think like I believe in Vitalik and like his ability and his team's ability to execute. And like there was a lot of layer ones, but I think at the end of the day, there's going to be like one or two winners. And I definitely think Solana is going to recover and is going to get there. And over time, like right now, we're only on ETH, but we have a multi-chain strategy where I think that's going to compose of like various vaults in different chains to hold custody of the actual assets on chain. And then on a like layer two that is more scalable, that is much more gas efficient to actually run the transactions.
Here we go. I was strangely enough looking at NFTFi on Solana like I don't know, maybe a week or two ago. And like on ETH, we're still really, really early. We're still really nascent with all that stuff. But Solana, I mean, God bless the people building that stuff, but it is a shit show over there. Like the lending markets are like just the kind of loans being taken out and what's available is an absolute mess. But I'm rooting for them at the very least.
Yeah, like I think they have a good developer community, and like as long as you have good talent building, I'm bullish.
Yeah, I mean,
Sure.
we'll see if liquidity ends up there. I kind of, I'm more on the doubting side, but there's a chance. Maybe SBF comes back and saves the chain. We actually have OmniX coming Tuesday, so it's interesting. You're talking multi-chain NFT stuff. I like the concept. I think there's some potential there, so we'll have to talk to them and see. But I appreciate you coming on. Appreciate you taking the time. And yeah, that's episode 3. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you so
Good
much.
stuff.
Thank you for all
Thank
the
you, Aaron.
good questions. Have a great weekend.
Thanks. See you guys.
You too, guys.
Bye.
Peace.